morning, everyone. This is the case of the people of the state of Colorado versus James Egan Holmes, case number 12 CR 1522. The record should reflect that Mr. Holmes is present with his attorneys, Mr. King, Ms. Brady, Ms. Nelson, Ms. Spengler, and Ms. Higgs. And the people are represented by Mr. Brockler, Mr. Orman, Ms. Pearson, Mr. Edson, and Ms. Tish McGuire. We are outside the presence of the jury at this time. One minor housekeeping matter. Do the parties have a position as to what they want the court to do with the extra copies of the exhibits that we have published by making copies for the jurors? I was going to return those to the people. I don't think there's a need to keep those for the record. Obviously, we're going to have the original exhibit, but I don't think we need to keep all the copies. Do you agree, Mr. Brockler?
I do.
Do you agree, Mr. King?
Sure, yes.
All right, we'll return those to the people. All right, is there anything we need to talk about at this time before we bring the jury in?
No, Your Honor.
Anything on behalf of the defense, Mr. King?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
All right, let's bring the jury in, please. Mr. Brockler, before the jury comes in, are you going to start off today with questions for Dr. Reid?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
You want him to retake this?
He might as well. Thank you. Please be seated, everyone. The record should reflect that the jury has joined us again. Welcome back, folks. Good morning. Good morning. How's everyone doing? Great. It's Friday. At the end of the day yesterday, Dr. Reid was on the witness stand, and the prosecution was in the middle of its direct examination of Dr. Reid, and Dr. Reid has resumed the witness stand. I remind you, doctor, that you're still under oath.
I understand.
And before Mr. Brockler proceeds with his direct examination, I want to remind you, members of the jury, of the limiting instruction that I gave you yesterday a couple of times, and that is that the testimony of Dr. Reid has been admitted only for a limited purpose. You may consider his testimony only as to the issues raised by the defendant's plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. You shall not consider this testimony for any other purpose. All right, with that, Mr. Brockler, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor.
Doctor, we yesterday. Have 1 second, Your Honor.
I think you just turned it on.
I did, and then it keeps flicking
Oh,
off.
does it keep?
Maybe it's just my fat just turning it off.
And if you need new batteries, can sell you some.
Doctor, we saw the first clip yesterday afternoon into the early evening, and it gets us to a point where we can ask some clarifying questions about what we've seen and what we should expect to see as we start moving forward. The first thing I want to ask you is there is a date and time stamp on that video. Is that accurate as to the actual date and time that this video was taken?
I'm fairly certain they are, yes.
And that's consistent throughout all 22 hours?
Yes.
All right. Now, we also had a chance to see your particular forensic interview style. Is there only one style of doing forensic psychiatric interviews?
No, there are different styles, all with the same goals and hopefully effective in reaching those goals.
What would be a style that is widely used in forensic psychiatry that's different than the one that you employed?
Some people, some professionals have a more directive style, going down a list in a very structured way. Most of us ask open-ended questions. That is, we may start the conversation and then listen to see where the interviewee or evaluee goes. There are certainly times that I and people like me ask specific questions to stay on track, and it's routine, as I do, to have a big list of topics that I want to be sure and cover at some point during the examination.
So you do not do a structured forensic interview?
Not a solely structured one. There is plenty of structure to get the information that I believe I need, but an awful lot of it is open-ended to see where things go and where the individual wants to go or can go. Sometimes they say stuff that I didn't expect, and that's fine.
Is there a benefit to that, to not being tied down to just a list of questions?
Sure, because one's list of questions may well not be complete, not cover everything. We don't know everything when we go into the interview. That's why we have the interview.
Here's the reason I ask. As we get into these subsequent video segments that you've made, as you go into each one, do you know exactly where it's going to end up and where it's going to go?
No. All I have is a general list, a rather long list, of places I want it to go eventually, of information I want. But one can't say in advance, here's the theme of this session, or here's what I want the theme of such and such a session to be, in the way that I do it. Now, in this case, I had great luxury of the time to do it. If I had an hour and a half to interview the person, I might be much more structured and much more directive to keep the person on track.
I want to talk to you about a couple of the tools that you use in this interview that we've seen and will see again. One is when you tell the defendant as he's talking to you, I don't understand. Are you saying I'm confused, or what are you doing there?
Sometimes I really don't understand for a variety of reasons, but a main reason for saying that is that I want the person to be as specific as possible. Many people, including this defendant, often answer vaguely, and if I accept that, the defendant's, that's just fine. But the real information, or the more accurate information, the more complete information, is underneath the superficial, more vague answer. So I want to bring out as much as I can and give as much opportunity for the person, if he will or if he can, to give me specifics. I don't want the things that I infer, the things that I interpret from the interview, to come from inside me. I want them to come from him. If I get a vague answer, then a lot of what I interpret from that comes from inside my head. I want it to come from accurate or specific things that are inside his head.
There's another tool that you use throughout, and that is to ask the defendant to, quote, speculate about something. Why do you do that?
Sure. This is not a situation in court. This is not a situation in a police station. This is a situation of trying to gather as much information as I can from within somebody's mind and brain and memory, so that asking someone to think about something for a while is perfectly reasonable. It's accepted throughout the mental health professions. Think about something, speculate about this, if you will. What else do you think might have happened? It's just routine psychiatric interview 101.
Now, we talked before we played the video about your extensive hundreds of hours of preparation for the interview. How does that start to pay off here as we go through these interviews?
Certainly the few hundred hours of interview record review in general and the specific preparation for the interview guide me about what I want to be sure and not forget. I forget stuff, and so I write it down. The other thing is that as I hear things from the evaluee, in this case the defendant, excuse me, as I hear things from him, I want to think in my mind, is this consistent with the record? Have I heard this elsewhere in the record? Or is it different from what I've seen in the record at some point or other? Sometimes I'll ask the defendant about that. Sometimes I keep it to myself and maybe bring it up later. But corroborating what he says, that is, seeing how consistent it is with the record itself, what other people have seen, what he's written down, what he's said to other people, that sort of thing, is important to telling me in a way how accurate or how honest it is, and those are two different words, accuracy and honesty. I can't read his mind, but it helps me to see what's consistent and what may not be consistent.
Now, you just brought up this issue of accuracy and honesty, and that do you just take everything that the defendant says at face value when you're interviewing him?
Judge, can we approach?
Yes. All right, Mr. Brockler, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, one of the things I wanted to ask you that you factor into your evaluation of the defendant through these interviews is, do you take into consideration the fact that when you're talking to him, he knows that he's facing the death penalty?
Yes.
Do you take into consideration the fact that he knows that his legal defense to the charges against him is that he's pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity?
Yes, so far as I know, he's well informed of that.
Okay. These are areas, those ones we just talked about, I think they allow us to really appreciate the rest of the videos as they go. What I want to ask you about as a follow-up substantively from that first section are just a couple different areas. One, we talked already, you don't jump right into, hey, tell me about planning for the murders and tell me what we don't jump right into that. You start with some preliminary stuff, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have some value to you. Tell me about why you went into the relationships that the defendant perceives that he has.
A number of reasons. A primary one is that relationships are an important part of our mental health. People who are mentally healthy tend to be able to form close relationships and intimate relationships and lasting relationships. People who are less mentally healthy tend to have trouble with that in one way or another. There's a lot of information in the record about Mr. Holmes' relationships and about how they reflect or may reflect characteristics of mental illness.
Will this be an issue you continue to ask about as we go through the rest of these videos?
Yes, and it's pretty standard fare for psychiatrists.
When you talk about relationship issues and mental health and the ability to form them, are you talking about diagnostic criteria for a mental health diagnosis?
Sometimes one's ability to form relationships or the kinds of relationship one forms are a part of the criteria for a particular diagnosis. It's generally not diagnostic in itself, but it may contribute to thinking about different diagnoses.
Do the issues that you covered in that first video based on relationship, do those speak to the issues of capacity to know right from wrong based on what the court instructed the jury on, or the capacity to form the intent to act or deliberate or know?
Objection, leading.
Overruled.
No, they don't speak to that very specific topic.
A couple other areas. One, you explore some issues that we might call empathy. Tell us about that.
Empathy, or being able to feel what other people feel or recognize other people's feelings, is another characteristic of mental health. The inability to recognize other people's feelings is a characteristic of, let me say, less mental health. Not everyone is empathic. Doesn't mean that you're terribly mentally ill, but the ability to understand how other people feel or understand how they may view things through their eyes to some extent has to do with one's mental condition.
Sense of humor. Did you detect a sense of humor in this first section that we went through?
Yes, there is a sense of humor there. Doesn't come through too often, but it certainly comes through in places. There's a quick wit that's illustrated at times, at least on certain topics.
Now, there's a couple things I want to ask you about that. The one that stood out to me, and you tell me if you disagree, if this is funny. You asked him if he'd ever overconsumed alcohol to the point, I think, of passing out. He says no. You ask, really? He responds with, I'm Irish. That was pretty quickly delivered. Why is that significant?
I don't want to overplay the significance of that. It indicates that at that particular time, with those particular sentences, he processed what I said quickly and processed an answer quickly, and it was to some extent a humorous or sarcastic answer. I don't want to make a great deal of it, but it wasn't one of the things that he had trouble thinking about or was slow in bringing from his brain to his mouth.
And is that somewhat inconsistent with his physical presentation?
That's a good point. As we saw in the last segment, and I believe we'll see in all the segments, he sits rather stiffly. His face tends not to change expression, although sometimes it does. He doesn't use his hands very much. He doesn't move very much in the chair, even over half an hour, 45 minutes. That is a bit different from an inference that I think one can reasonably make about how quickly or how well his brain is working, at least in certain areas. And that, once again, I don't want to exaggerate the importance of that.
Sure. There was one specific area you went into him factually with, and that was the Christmas trip that he took. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Based on what was said on the video, it sounds like that Christmas trip was the one that preceded this crime. Is that accurate?
It happened in December of 2011. I believe he got back to Denver in early January. I'm not certain of that date.
Now, you told us previously, in preparation for this interview, you'd spoken with the defendant's parents. Do you remember that?
Yes.
At any time during that hour-and-a-half conversation with them, did they express to you, if you recall, any concerns about seeing their son over that period of time, that Christmas break period that they took to that trip to Arizona he talked about, and being concerned about any sort of changes with him, mental deterioration, any observations they made that caused them concern?
Objection. Calls for hearsay.
Would counsel approach, please? All right, the hearsay objection is sustained, and Mr. Brockler, you may proceed and attempt to establish further foundation.
Thank you, Your Honor. I need to ask you some other questions. Do you remember, Doctor, yesterday when we talked about the importance you placed on speaking with the parents of the defendant prior to formulating your opinion and moving forward with the interview?
Yes.
Now, are the statements that the parents make to you about their observations of their son, are those things that you rely upon in helping to formulate your expert opinion?
Among other things, yes. I didn't spend more than, I think, about an hour and a half with them on the telephone, but it's important to see what they have to say and see what they choose to say, sure.
And how they relate their perceptions of their son through this period of time?
Yes.
Your Honor, based on that, I'm going to re-ask that question.
Why don't counsel approach, please? right, Mr. Brockler, you may proceed pursuant to Rule 703 and the ruling that I made here at the bench.
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, I want to ask you that question before we ended up doing a couple sidebars there, but I want to give it a little more context. When you spoke with the parents for that hour and a half time, and you talked about their observations to some extent of their son over that Christmas period, did they express to you that he had been sick in some way?
As I recall, yes. I don't have my notes in court of that conversation, although I do have notes of the conversation. They talked about his being ill in a tired way, which by the time I talked with them, everyone knew that that was infectious mononucleosis or mono that was discovered while he was at home.
Other than them raising to you the issue of his physical illness through mononucleosis, did they ever express to you any other concerns when they last saw their son over this Christmas break about his mental well-being, odd behaviors, any change in him?
Subject to something else in my notes, I do not recall anything.
Okay, thank you. Finally, and we're going to get ready to play this second clip here. In that first clip, tell us, was there anything in there that impacted your opinion about the defendant's capacity to know right from wrong based on the standard given by the court?
No.
Anything that impacted your opinion about the defendant's capacity to form the intent to murder after deliberation or act knowingly?
Everything goes into the big pot, but the answer is no.
Thank you. May I approach the witness, Your Honor? And frankly, Your Honor, I think I laid the foundation for this yesterday. I just didn't move to admit it. I think I'll move to admit People's 1004 into evidence.
I have no additional objections to the ones already lodged.
Thank you. Based on my prior rulings, P-TR-1004 is admitted and may be published.
And with the court's permission, could Dr. Reid step down again while we play this?
Yes, and as he does that, members of the jury, I will again remind you of the limiting instruction that I gave you yesterday that Dr. Reid's statements on this video recording may only be considered for the limited purpose of allowing you to evaluate the reliability of his examination and to provide context to the statements that were made by Mr. Holmes in the video. You shall not consider any statements made by Dr. Reid on this video recording for any other purpose, including for the truth of the statements, for the truth of the content of the statements. Does everyone understand that? Yes. And everybody's saying yes or nodding their head yes. Okay, great. With that, then, you may publish the exhibit. Do you folks want me to dim the lights again? Yes, they're saying yes. Okay, I will do so. Here I go.
Your Honor, is it possible to ask the court to check on its end whether or not it's muted? Because we tested it out earlier and it...
Oh, I'm being told we don't do sound at all.
Huh?
So it sounds like it's on your end.
Lisa, please.
You want her to keep playing that?
Yes, sir.
You can keep playing that. Why don't we do this? Why don't we, I'm going to turn the lights back on. Let's take a break and see if we can figure it out, okay? All right. Okay, so let's take a break and then we'll go from there.
I was only going to ask when the court was.
Yeah, we might as well do it. All right, folks, please remember my advisements during the break. Hopefully we'll get some non-lawyers and see if they can figure it out. Technology and lawyers don't mix well. All right, let's take a break. We'll come and get you when we're ready. Don't go too far. I'm hoping to take about a 15-minute break, okay? All right, thank you. The record should reflect that the jury has exited the courtroom. Now everyone may be seated. All right, what if we take a break and let you try to figure out if you can get it to work? Is that all right?
Your Honor, yes. One suggestion was Ms. Huntsman, who's infinitely smarter than I am, thought that when you clicked your mic on is when it cut the sound off. I don't know if that's a difference maker, but we'll try to figure that out.
When I clicked my mic on.
When we approached and she hit pause and then maybe when you turned on your microphone in anticipation of speaking with us, Your Honor?
Yeah, I didn't turn I think my mic is always on. I only turned it off, so, but if you get it to work, I won't touch it again in the hopes that it works. All right, I'll step down so you folks can look at it. Okay, the court will be in recess.
All right.
15 minutes, thank you.